Hi guys, today we're gonna talk about the components in Angular. So what is a component? Component is the smallest part of the Angular application, and if you create a couple of those parts, you can join them together to create your application and build bigger parts called modules. Each component consists of component metadata. This metadata tells Angular that this class or this TypeScript code should be treated as component, not as normal TypeScript class. It also has HTML template, TypeScript class, which defines the behavior of the component, component selector. This will allow to put your component anywhere in your application, and optional you can have CSS styles. So how to create a new component? The easiest way is to use Angular command line interface. So let's go open our application, Angular Basics. Let's run new terminal. And let's type ng generate component. And here you put the name of your component. Let's call it test component. So let's talk about the component structure. You can see that our component was created in the app module. The camel case naming was changed with dash. And here we have 4 files. So first is test component HTML, which is the template of our component. Second is our SCSS, which are styles for our component. Third one is specs TS. These are the tests for our component. And fourth one is the TypeScript of our component. Okay, so let's run our application by typing ng-serve. Okay, let's see it on localhost 4200. Open app component. Let's delete everything is over here. And let's put our test component. If I remember correctly, that was the selector for it. We can see that our test component works. So in our TypeScript file, we have a property template URL, which tells the component where is the HTML for this component. It's over here. We have two options. We can leave it like that, or we can use if we have something short, we can use just template and use and define our HTML over here. Let's add inline to show you that it changed. This is the inline of our component. Let's go back to template URL. And this is displaying the component from the template URL. This way is more convenient for me, but you can use it differently. In Angular, you can define the same way as template URL, style URLs, which currently are empty. But if you want to, you can also define styles over here. let's say that our P element should be displayed bigger. You can see that the P element is bigger. If we do the same over here, it will work exactly the same. Let's save everything and let's refresh. Okay. In Angular, styles are encapsulated by default per component. This means that if you add a new CSS class in your component file, in your component CSS file, it will only be visible by this component. Let's inspect this element. And we can see that here is the uproot and here is the selector for our component. Okay. Let's add a new p tag and let's add a red class. And let's define that this class red will display a text color in red. It's color, not text color. Okay, so this text is in red. We can change the view encapsulation to shadow DOM, emulated, or none. Okay, let's try to change the view encapsulation. To shadow DOM. And one more time, let's inspect our app component. As you can see, it created a shadow DOM in our inside of our component, and this is gonna tell the Angular that all the classes in this shadow DOM will be inherited. But not all the browsers supports shadow DOM elements, so be careful with that. The default behavior is emulated. So Angular creates a unique name for our classes inside of our components. That way, if we go back to our app component, and if we copy the HTML for our red, so the app component is the different component from our test. This text is not in red and it's not in font size 60, so it doesn't work that way. If you want to use the red class in all of your components in all your Angular application, you can change the view encapsulation to none. And now our red class from our test component will be visible in app component. So if we inspect that, you can see that this text in red is in uproot, and here lower on the same level as this p element is the app test component. Okay, so let's assume we want to display some value that is gonna be defined in our test component. Let's create a property name and let's assign to it string Peter. So the one way to display this in our component, let's delete all of that so it's not gonna mess. It's string interpolation. So you type 2 open braces and 2 close braces, and in the middle we type the name of our property. Okay, let's call it first name, so it's not confusing that the name. Okay, let's use the first name. It displays Peter. You can also create more complex object like user, and the user has the first name property with value John. And here we're gonna type the user object and first name of this. So that's the interpolation. We can also have a property binding. Property binding binds the value passed from the component to the DOM. Example of property binding can be disabled attribute. Let's create a disabled property and set it to true. It says that we have an error. Here it's good. So this button is disabled. If we say that the disabled to false, it's not gonna be disabled. So this value, false or true, was passed from the component to the DOM. In Angular, we also have event binding. Event binding are events, and you use them with round bracelet. So let's assume that our button won't be disabled, and on click we're gonna set is disabled to true. So we're gonna change the disabled property on clicking. So right now it's not disabled, clicking it and it's disabled. So this was the example of binding from our DOM to our TypeScript component. And last type of binding is two-way binding with ng model. So the simplest way to show you how the ng model works is to create input with ng model inside it, and let's assign the user first name to ng model. To work with that, we have to add in app module, we have to import forms module. And after it is imported, we can see that here we have the value John, and also we pass the value John to our input, but if we type something here and change the name to Peter or to Greg, it's gonna pass the value from the DOM to our component. So that is how two-way binding works. Okay, so we start with that we displayed our component by selector. So our component has a selector here. If we change the name test component, it didn't compile because it says that it couldn't find the app test component. This is a not known element to Angular. So we also have the change to test component in our app component, so it can be displayed. Now it's working. Second way of displaying our components is by router outlet. We're gonna talk about it later. Yeah, here is a routing model and our routes. You can also define the new route. So the path is test, and the component to load under this path is test component. So if we delete the app component, under our base address there is no test component, and if we change the location to test, our component is displayed. That is for today. In next video we're gonna talk about the interaction with parent-child components, how to pass inputs to the child component, and how to subscribe to events in the parent component. Let's not forget to subscribe to my channel. Thanks. Complete code for this lesson you can find on my GitHub page, links in the description.